Please welcome Derek Daly.
Woo! Thank you. Thank you, John. So you're in day 2 of meetings and keynotes and networking and all designed to help you grow your business. I'm going to take you down a different track. Excuse the pun. Instead of me talking about how you operate your piece of your business, I'm going to use my time this afternoon to give you a feel for how my business operates. Motor racing at the highest levels. A sport that's colorful, glamorous, fast-paced, success-oriented, and sometimes a little bit risky. I was a great example of somebody who got to live his dream. My dad sold vegetables out of a corner grocery store, and I got to race in Formula 1 and at the Indy 500, in the fastest, most sophisticated cars on the planet. And it's a sport that pushes people right to the edges of what might be possible. And when I tell people it's a sport of exacting human performance that operates under pressure in compressed time frames, a lot of people tell me, well, my business is going a bit like that. Isn't it fair to say? In the world that we now live in, we're all being pushed out towards the edges of what might be possible. You know, my sport makes great demands on people. It demands high-performance thinkers and high-performance behaviors. But do you know it's almost impossible to mandate high performance? But what you can do is you can set high enough standards and have committed and aligned people dig deep within themselves to see what can be fulfilled. Now, if I talk a little funny, I'm from a place called Ireland. Hands up, has anyone ever heard of Ireland? It's a great place, it's a long way from here. If you have the pleasure of going to my home country, you'll work out very quickly. They're a very friendly group of people, love to get together and have a chat. They love to go out at night and have a drink. They love to go out in the morning and have another drink. You know, if you're in a pub at the end of the night in Ireland, they'll tell you that the Irish only drink twice, when they're thirsty and when they're not. And so it was a bit of an unusual environment for me to go to my dad when I was 12 years of age and tell him I wanted to become a professional race car driver. We had a grass patch outside our house. All the kids played soccer. That's just what you did. My dad told the people who came to buy their groceries that I came from very much a privileged upbringing. If I wanted to do anything out of the ordinary, I would have the privilege of finding a way to do it all by myself. And I was actually okay with that. But I had no idea the trek that I would go on. I had no idea the experiences that I would be forced into at a relatively young age. Now, so you know I was a professional race car driver, and you know what a race car looks like. Well, have a look at my very first race car here. Yep. And you'd be proud of your son if he arrived home and said, Dad, I'm going to be a professional race car driver, and I just bought my very first car. I wanted to tow it on the end of a rope, down through the neighborhood streets, put it into the garage at the back of our house, because that's where I was going to work on it. That was my reality back then. I was 16 years of age. Do you know back then I was the youngest driver in the Republic of Ireland to hold a competition license? Today, I'd be at least 10 years too late. Today, they're racing go-karts at 4 and 5 and 6 years of age. But I went all the way from here to the Formula 1 World Championship. What an amazing time that was. Amazing time because I did have hair back in those days. That is me. But we started off our season in Argentina. We would stay out for 2 weeks, then go to Sao Paulo, Brazil for the Brazilian Grand Prix, still use the same track today. We would go back to Europe, regroup, rebuild the cars, go to South Africa the second week in March, go back, regroup, rebuild the cars, then do a different country every 2 weeks. Spain, Italy, Germany, Monaco. It was an amazing time. The white car that you see there, that's the last team I raced for in Formula 1, the Williams team. They're still active in Formula 1 today. Do you know back then we spent $25 million running 2 cars in the World Championship? People said it'll never last. You'll never generate that amount of commercial sponsorship year in, year out to spend $25 million. Today, to run at that level today, it's $250 million of a budget. And it's never been bigger. Formula One today is the largest watch sports platform in the world. The manufacturers use it to make a statement. Our designers, our technology, our team of people will build a car and go against our showroom competitors under the watchful eye of global television and prove we are the best of the best. It's an amazing sports platform. You know, back then, the lap record for the 3.5-mile road course was 160 miles an hour. And I thought that was impressive until I came to some place in America called Indianapolis. When I got there, they were doing 200 miles an hour. And for a European road racer, what was unusual, they were doing it between 2 concrete walls. Hands up here, has anyone ever driven at 200 miles an hour? Intentionally? Just to give you an idea, if you did drive at 200 miles an hour, you'll cover the full length of a football field every second. Do you know today, it's not even considered fast. Do you know today, if you can only do 200 miles an hour, they won't allow you into the fast racing groove at the Indy 500. You won't be allowed even past your rookie test if you can only do 200 miles an hour. In fact, at 200 miles an hour, they will black flag you off the track and send you home because you're considered to be a hazard because you can only do 200 miles an hour. Isn't that an amazing business model? If you can't stay up with the competition, they send you home. It's an amazing business model. You know, today, when I go to watch the Indy 500, it's got very different meaning for me these days and very heightened emotional meaning because my oldest son, Connor Daly, now races at the Indy 500. 3 years ago, he led more laps at the Indy 500 than any other driver in the race. It was an amazing time for me to watch his dad, and it looked a bit like this. Have a look.
Back in the stands.
He's just going to have a look. Here comes Daly. Daly going big. Look at this. Connor Daly.
Hometown hero wants the lead. He's grown up here his whole life.
Listen to the crowd. Oh, they went crazy.
Can you imagine 350,000 people watching your son take the lead in the biggest motorsports event in the year? I mean, my heart's just pounding as I'm on his radio listening to what his crew chief says to him. The year after this, he set a record at Indy because he set the fastest straight line speed down the back straight through the speed trap of 243.7 miles an hour. Just an amazing speed. And his era, the era that he's going through, is an era of brutal speed. The engineers win the battle. The eras that I went through were 3 completely different eras in my career. The first of those eras was what I call the good era. It was when good teams could hire good people, do a good job, and be successful. But then it took a shift. When we went over into the 90s, it took a shift because technology suddenly crept in. Suddenly there was reams of data that the engineers could pore over, and it was only a smaller number of great teams who could actually use all the data to their advantage to increase performance. That was when it took the first shift. It shifted from good to great. And we all know what that era was. But then when we crossed over into the 21st century, it took another shift because suddenly the regulations tightened down. Suddenly, we no longer had the freedom to build whatever car and whatever engine we wanted. Everybody had to use essentially the same chassis, the same amount of horsepower, the same tires. So now you are forced to outthink your competition both on and off the track if you were to have sustained success. That was when it took the next shift. It went from good to great to extraordinary. It was only a small number of extraordinary teams who could actually use the data and then outthink the competition both on and off the track. What do you think extraordinary looks like? where do you think extraordinary lives? I don't know where it lives in your daily activities, but I want to take a bit of my time to give you a bit of a feel for what extraordinary looks like in my business. You know, one of the occupational hazards of our sport is you go fast. And when you go at the speeds that we were able to run, if something happens, it can be catastrophic. And unfortunately, it happened to me in 1984, and it was catastrophic because after a 217-mile-an-hour impact against a concrete wall, the red arrow there shows the V. See the V? There are my legs. The car is still rotating at 150 miles an hour, trying to throw me out of the car, but I'm strapped in with a six-point harness. You see the front's already broken off the car because the impact was so great. I'm in the middle of that mangled wreckage there. This was actually measured as the hardest crash impact a driver had ever managed to survive. When the safety team came, it was just after I rolled down off the banking. There are my legs dangling out on the road as the car rolls down to the inside. The head of trauma put me on the stretcher, strapped me onto it, and said, we better get the helicopter fired up because we're going to have to take him straight to intensive care. I ended up in Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis, and after 19 surgeries and 3 years in therapy, I don't mind telling you, this accident pretty much changed my life. To give you an idea of the injuries I had, severe dislocations of my right foot, right ankle, lost all the soft tissue on my heel because it ran along the ground. I had a toe traumatically amputated on my left foot. I had a crushed left ankle that took a bone graft from my hip to rebuild an ankle joint with 4 plates and 18 screws. I had an 18-inch rod on my left leg to realign a double compound fracture of my leg. I had a broken hip joint, broken pelvis, broken ribs, broken hand, broken arm, 3rd-degree burns, had a lacerated liver. For good measure, the blood transfusions were laced with hepatitis C. I don't know whether you remember back in that day, Time magazine had a front page cover about the silent killer, which was Hep C, because it ate your organs from the inside out. But how do you process something like this? How do you make sense when something like this catastrophic happens in your life? And I had friends would come into my hospital room and say, are you going to go back racing again? Or an even more pointed question is they'd ask, why would you ever even consider going back to a sport that all but killed you? And it was a really difficult question to answer at the time because this was all I knew. This was all I dedicated my life to. But when you're mixed up and you're injured and you know you're going to have pain for the rest of your life every single day, how do you move past this? The only way I could move past it is one day when the medication began to clear out, I thought of the conversation I had with my dad when I was 12 years of age in Ireland. And when I told him I wanted to become a professional race car driver, he told me 2 things. He said, I will help you in every possible way with your career as long as it's not financial help you need. I knew what that meant. And then he said, always remember, you'll be responsible for the legacy that you leave in the sport. And during recovery, when things didn't make a lot of sense, that conversation came rushing back to me. And the word legacy had a profound effect on me because I realized I would never want the accident to be the legacy that I would leave in the sport that I dedicated my life to. So when I realized I was in control of the legacy, I had to recover. I had to get race fit. I had to go to physical therapy. I had to get mentally prepared. I had to find a racing team. I had to get back to control the legacy that I would leave. 8 months later, with the help of a cane and 1.5-inch heel lifts in my racing boots, because I couldn't move my ankles, I actually managed to qualify for the Indy 500, 8 months after lying in the hospital bed. There's a rule at Indy, you have to be able to walk to and from the car. The only way I could do it was with the 1.5-inch heel lifts, because I could duck walk to the car. But without that word legacy, I don't know whether I might have been as driven to do that, but then I could eventually control the legacy that I left in the sport. But then I realized we're all in control of the legacy that we leave, right? Everywhere. In our families, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our jobs. We're all in control of the legacy that we leave. And if we understand that, let me ask everybody a question here. If there was a book written about Blackhawk or about your company, and if there was a chapter in it about you, what would you like it to say? Amazing legacy. And it's part of the DNA of this company to survive stuff like this. And I bet you everybody in this room has crashed at some stage. I bet you've all hit the wall at some stage. And if you didn't, I'm pretty sure you will, because we never all escape unscathed. And when it happened to you, can you learn how to forget? That's what we were trained to do when you had an accident like this. Learn how to forget. You're never beaten when you're knocked down. You're only beaten when you stay down. And you know the beauty of a setback, it provides the platform for a comeback. Setbacks are never celebrated, but comebacks certainly are. But that word legacy has such power. But listen, an amazing set of circumstances began to fall into place when I'm in recuperation. I fell into television broadcasting. I was in Las Vegas at the final IndyCar race. I did an interview with ESPN. I got a call a week later. It was, Derek, would you like to do color and we'll pay you for it? I said, yes, absolutely. I had no idea what I just agreed to. I never heard the term color before. I wasn't familiar with American television vernacular, but apparently ESPN were going to pay me to travel the world to talk about the sport while I'm in recuperation. And I met an amazing group of people in television broadcasting. I spent 20 years with Paul Newman. He was the co-owner of the Newman-Haas IndyCar team that Mario Andretti drove for. He was so passionate about the sport and a race car driver himself. I spent 6 days with Stallone. I had a racing school in Las Vegas. Sylvester Stallone, we know Rocky is his natural athletic activity. He knows what boxers do. He can play that part. But to be a race car driver, he wanted to be in the car, behind the wheel, driving on a racetrack. And so he came to our school, and I was his coach for 6 days. Might have been the worst student we ever have come through our school, but he was a $50 million a movie guy at the time. I mean, he was a megastar. Came with his bodyguards every day. It was an amazing time. Maybe the most influential sports hero I ever got to mix with was the great Muhammad Ali. I got to spend time in his home with him in Los Angeles. That's me standing behind his desk, right beside him, as he goes to take some papers out of a plastic bag. Can you imagine? My heart was pounding through my chest, sitting beside Muhammad Ali in his own home. The message he gave to all of us who were there that day was just make good choices. That was the most important thing he wanted to pass on at that time. I heard it this morning. Make good choices. But do you know, it wasn't the people that I found fascinating. It was the research. Because do you know, when I researched the number of extraordinary teams who ever get the privilege of celebrating on our victory podiums, you know what the victory podium looks like in our sport. The victory podium, in Formula One, they have champagne and they spray it all over the mechanics and the engineers. They're all down there. At the Indy 500, they have an amazing tradition. They hand the winner a bottle of milk. In 1936, the winner of the Indy 500 said, when he's in victory lane, "Oh, I'd love a drink of my favorite beverage," which happened to be cold milk. The Indiana Dairy Association said, "What an amazing marketing tradition we could create," and it goes on to this day. But you know, the victory podium is a place where the team's got to make a statement. On that day, against our competition, didn't matter what the decision-making we needed to have, didn't matter what the pressure was, our team of people proved we were the best of the best. But here's the thing. Do you know, in my research, when I looked at the number of teams who ever had the privilege of celebrating on the victory podium at the biggest races in the world, I realized the number of teams was so incredibly small. And I asked a really basic, simple question. Why? Why is so few extraordinary teams of people have the privilege of celebrating against their competition on a sustained basis? Do they communicate differently? Do they plan differently? Did they execute differently? Were they better under pressure? What was it? I had access to everybody. Mario Andretti, AJ Foyt, Danny Sullivan, Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, Roger Penske. I had access to everybody in my television job. And when I asked them the question, the answers were fascinating. I'm going to share some of those answers with you. You know, the first time I went to the Indy 500, that's a shot in the Valvoline car of my very first pit stop. When I got there, the magic speed was 200 miles an hour. I couldn't do it. I could do 198 average, I could do 199, and after 3 days, I just couldn't get enough speed out of my car. I was told, as a European road racer, that I needed to go down the pit lane, find a veteran of the sport of American superspeedway racing, and ask him what's the technique I don't understand. I go down to Mario Andretti. We just spent 5 years racing together in Formula One, and I said, "Mario, can you share with me this technique that I don't understand?" He said, "It's very simple." He said, "The next time you go out," he said, "when you're going down the long front straight," he said, "tell your brain to tell your foot not to come off the gas pedal until after you turn the steering wheel deep down into the first corner." So I got strapped in. I fired the engine up. We had about 1,000 horsepower in our engines back in the day. I drive down the pit lane. I drive around. I come down the front straight. I'm doing about 220 miles an hour on the straight. The wind's absolutely whistling by. And I remember exactly what he said to me. Now, the closer this corner got, I'm not so sure I'm brave enough to do what he said. And then the corner got really close, and a flash of fear went across my mind. I suddenly thought, do you think he told me the truth? So I backed off. I go through turns 2, 3, and 4, and I load it again. I come down the straight. I see turn 1 coming. I get a little bit further, but I still wasn't brave enough. I backed off. Okay, third time around. I white knuckle down on the steering wheel. I take a deep breath. I pucker down into the seatbelts. Here's turn 1. I'm flat all the way, and I drive her deep down into it. Then I back off to just balance the car. Lots of grip in the car. Much faster corner entry speed. And I did the same at turns 2, 3, and 4. Flashed across the start-finish line at 201 miles an hour. Right there. Because I learned this new technique. And of course, I thought he told me the technique to help me. And then I realized he didn't. He told me the technique to help him and everybody else who might be around a rookie. Can you imagine at 200 miles an hour with open wheel cars and a rookie making unusual or abrupt moves? It could be catastrophic. And then I realized at the speed I was going, I trusted my life to the information Mario gave me. And I send young drivers for his counsel today because I know we can trust him implicitly. But then I realized trust is the very foundation of these extraordinary teams of people who operate out on the edge of what might be possible. And you never build trust faster in your own team than taking what you know and sharing it with the people around you to make them better. When someone's got your back, it's amazing how you'll dare to step out. The foundation of those extraordinary teams is trust. Trust is a must. So remember the business model I told you about earlier on where they send you home if you can't stay up with the competition? Let me just throw it up on the screen here. This is the high-performance motorsports business model. Large groups of well-managed people, communicate effectively, lots of variables. They work in harmony together as they execute the plan. Innovative people embrace change, work to strict deadlines at times, intense pressure, and they focus on the restless pursuit of marginal gains. Because remember, when the regulations tightened down, we no longer had the freedom to outspend people. The restless pursuit of marginal gains. You know, the beauty about this business model is the results of how you operate your business are transparent every Sunday afternoon. You get your report card right there. You know exactly how you did against the competition. And this has been the success model for decades in our sport. And it no longer works. Proven for decades, no longer works. It's not enough. It's not extraordinary enough unless you surround it with the right culture. And we all hear the word culture on a regular basis. And in our sport, culture isn't some abstract concept, but it's something that has to be encoded into every team member, particularly those on the front line. And you know, when I talk about culture, it's not a culture of success, and it's not really a culture of winning. It's very much a culture of extraordinary. And there's that word again. So what does a culture of extraordinary look like? So imagine we're in these teams. I want to get an insight into how they think and operate. So all of these team players operate with a culture of extraordinary. Let me show you what it looks like. All of these team members in these extraordinary teams live convinced they could be beaten tomorrow. It's in their DNA. They take it away with them. They go to bed at night with it. If we're not careful, if we don't watch what's going on all around us, we could get beaten tomorrow. Part of what keeps them on the edge. Let me show you one more. They understand that critical performance gains occurs at the margins and boundaries of what your people and your equipment can do. Right out on the margins. That's where the adventure is. That's where the road to the victory podium is, out on the edges of what your people and your equipment can do. Have a look at another one here. All of these team members are trained to disbelieve in the sustainability of your own performance. Think about that for a second. It doesn't matter if you won last Sunday. You better disbelieve that's generally sustainable or you become vulnerable. And the time of great success is when we're most vulnerable. But just think of these teams of people. They disbelieve in the sustainability of their own performance. By the way, I see people taking shots here. Afterwards, you're going to get a PDF with this so everybody can have them. So you can have it in your pocket, you can share it, you can print it, however. These are powerful. So that's a bit about how they think, the soft skills. Let me throw in some hard skills. And this one seems pretty easy, preparation. But do you know, preparation takes on a different meaning for us when you realize your life depends on it. At 235 miles an hour down the straight at Indy, what type of team would you like to have behind you? Preparation, it's powerful. Do you think it's a coincidence that when I do my television interviews at the front of the starting grid at the Indy 500, do you think it's a coincidence I inevitably see the best painted, best sponsored, best prepared cars right up the front of the starting grid? And they've earned that exclusive position by qualifying faster, doing a better job than the competition. All the mechanics are immaculately dressed. They stand behind their car, ready to go, knowing that all the job lists have been taken care of, as well as, or maybe even better, than everybody they're in the competition with. Now, do you think it's a coincidence? When I move to the middle of the grid to do my television interviews, I see some pretty good teams there. They're glad to be in the Indy 500. Now, all of these teams are already looking forward to other teams of people who've already demonstrated they've done a better job so far. Race hasn't even started yet. Now, when I move to the back of the grid to do my television interviews, I no longer see immaculately dressed mechanics. I'll see people in jeans, they've got tools in their pockets. I took all these shots, by the way. You don't see much sponsorship support for these teams. And if you look very carefully, there's a mechanic. He's on his hands and knees. He's actually working on the gearbox on the starting grid of the largest single-day attended sports event in the world. Now, do you think it's a coincidence? Statistically, since 1911, the fallout and failure rate at the Indy 500 also happens to start from the back of the grid and goes forward, because it is directly proportional to the preparation these teams of people put in before they go against the competition. And the back of the grid is inevitably populated by teams of people who have all the resources available to them, just didn't avail of them, or might resent that things have changed so fast and they just wish it could be like it was all those years ago. And of course, it never will again. But there's a double whammy to being on the back of the grid in our sport. A, you've taken yourself out of a position of advantage. But the double whammy is you've potentially given an advantage to your competition. Now, what makes these presentations really worthwhile to me is if I thought everybody in this room took away one nugget. You can take away more if you like, but if you took away one nugget that you could actually use on a regular basis or radiate to the people within your sphere of influence, we'd have had a good mission. This might be one of them. Because let me ask everybody a question here. As regards your preparation, or the preparation of the people within your sphere of influence, where do you think you are on the starting grid of the race you are now in every day? Whenever I float that question, everybody knows what their own personal answer is. And if you don't see yourself clearly up the front of the starting grid, you have all the resources available to you to get yourself there. But here's the magic. The closer you see yourself as regards your preparation or your team of people's preparation, the closer you see yourself to the front of the starting grid of the race you're in every day, the closer you are to emulating those extraordinary teams of people who get themselves in a position to celebrate on those victory podiums more often. So I'd love every day when you go to work and you just close the door at your home, I'd love everybody to ask themselves, as regards my preparation, where am I on the starting grid today for the race I'm in every day? And if it just edged you closer to what might be possible right out to the edge, can you imagine the kick for me? To think that my sport could potentially have an effect on corporate America and just edge everybody closer to the edge that I showed you earlier on. Amazing. Now, let me ask a question. Anybody here think you could over-prepare for what you do every day? Anybody think you could over-prepare? No, probably not. That's fair. I will tell you, you can over-prepare to race at the Indy 500. Because it happened to me the very first time I got there. Remember, our Formula One races were only an hour and 45 minutes long. When you go to the Indy 500, it could be 3.5 hours long. It could be a long, hot, sweaty afternoon. It's in the Midwest. It could be 80 or 90 degrees on race day. We wear 3 layers of fireproof clothing. Doesn't breathe that well. There's no air conditioning in the car. So you are in for a long, hot, sweaty afternoon. So the buzzwords when drivers worked out together was pre-hydration. Drink as much as you can before you get into the car, before you start the long, hot, sweaty afternoon. Now, the clever team managers put a drink bottle on board the car with a little plastic bladder, sat in the side pod, little electric motor on it like the windshield washer bottle on your road car. A pipe came up between our seat belts. We would drill a hole in our helmets, push the pipe in, and at any time during the Indy 500, you could push a button on the steering wheel, get a nice cold drink of iced water or Irish whiskey for an Irish fellow, was it? Whatever made you go fast. But have you ever thought what might happen if you drank way too much before you ever got in to a long race like that? So what happened to me the very first time I'm there, we're only 70 laps into the race, we're under yellow, lots of time to think as we run slowly behind the safety car, and I have such a pain. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do here? I said, I can't make a pit stop and run to the porta potty in the middle of the Indy 500. That would be a hell of a press release. And I thought, well, you know, I'm going to be in here for another 2.5 hours. Maybe I'll just go ahead and go in the seat. In 2.5 hours, it'll all be dried up and no one will ever know. So I did. It was a wonderful relief. The only problem was my engine blew up 2 laps later. It was still running out the bottom. Okay, so I want to keep on the theme of extraordinary. I want to show you a Formula One pit stop. Do you know just over 8 years ago, a Formula One pit stop took 8 seconds? So the car would drive in, a front jackman would manually jack the front up, a rear jackman would manually jack the back of it up, the driver puts it into neutral, a man would get down on his knees with a gun, take off the wheel nut, take the wheel off, get another one, put it back on, tighten it up. The jackman at the front will see when it's ready, he'll drop it down. The jackman at the back will see it's ready, he'll drop it down. And then the engineer would call for the driver to put it into gear and drive away. Just over 8 years ago, it took 8 seconds. 6 years ago, it took 6 seconds. 4 years ago, they had it down to 4 seconds. 2 years ago, they had it down to 2 seconds. Do you know last May, at the Formula One Grand Prix race in Miami, 2 teams did it in 1.8 seconds. Amazing. Here, have a look. It looks like this. This is faster than you can sign your name. Boom. It's all over. I'll show it again. Look. 29 people descend on the car. Quick, quick, boom. 1.8 seconds. One more time. Faster than you can sign your name. Now, do you know why they did it in 1.8 seconds? Because they wanted to. Individuals practice, rehearse, choreograph, work together because they want to. It's a sense of pride. It's a sense of purpose. It's a sense of accomplishment. It inspires everybody else in the team when they can do something like this. This is operating on the edge of what might be possible. And they will get faster, without a doubt. Just amazing. I want you to hear from a friend of mine, Mario Andretti, when it talks about teams of people.
A lot of people don't realize how much of a team sport motor racing is. And in fact, any successful corporations, if they're going to forge ahead, they better rely, or they need to rely on a strong team.
And if they're going to decode sales excellence, they better rely on the team of people around them. But I go to Mario because he's been through the mill. As big a name as he has, he's been through the mill too, with great teams, extraordinary teams, and bad teams. So I asked him to help me fill in 3 more profounds of the culture of extraordinary. And he loves to think about the proud moments that he had with certain people. But just let's go back into how these teams think. And I want to show you 3 more. All of these team members are individualistic in their thinking, but team players in their actions. Think about that for a second. We want the individualistic thinkers to be looking around at all aspects of ways that we can improve the process and improve everything we do. And we want them all to come back and be team players in their actions. I love this one. They encourage innovation everywhere to create new sources of performance, to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the process. Think about it. Remember, there is no magic piece of machinery or tools that you'll suddenly have available to you. No. But the very process of how we go about our racing, innovation creates the very effective process. Keep looking at the micro pieces, the relentless pursuit of marginal gains, like that business model I showed you earlier. This might be my favorite one here, number 6. Success requires a portfolio. Remember, success in our sport, in our teams, requires a portfolio of leaders throughout the organization, willing and capable to accept responsibility of leadership, regardless of the formal authority. You have to be told you manage those people over there. You don't need a name tag or a designation. The portfolio of leaders permeate all through these teams of people. And I believe corporations who want to operate on the edge of what might be possible as we go forward. Maybe the team that I raced for that understood this concept best of all was the great British Jaguar team that I raced for at the Le Mans 24-hour race in France. Some of you may have heard of this, but the Le Mans 24-hour race, the endurance race, is arguably the most famous in the world. All the manufacturers go there to make another statement. Not only are we faster than the competition, but we are reliable for the long, long haul. That's why endurance racing is so popular. This was the fastest car I ever drove. This thing did 248 miles an hour down the straight in the daytime. Nighttime, even faster, 251 miles an hour in the dead of night. You engine gurus will know that the cool, dense air of nighttime makes more horsepower. This was just a beast of a thing. You weren't going fast enough to use top gear in this thing till you're above 237 miles an hour. It was that fast. But it was an amazing team. We had amazing success because of the structure of the team. And the structure of the team looked like this. They had the formal structure of a big organization in place, but in addition, they also had an informal structure in place that allowed us to adapt and change quickly. Why? There's a rule at the Le Mans 24-hour race that says the mechanics can only work on the car when it's in the pit lane. That doesn't come in unless you get into trouble. But under normal circumstances, when you run 24 hours flat out, so many things can happen. You could have an engine issue, gearbox issue, electrical issue, you get a puncture, something with your lights, you could get caught in somebody else's accident. But at 4 o'clock in the morning, when a driver comes screaming down the pit lane, he's on the radio to his crew chief who's waiting for him, and he says, I need this, and this to be fixed. They don't have time for a committee meeting to decide what they do. So the frontline people are empowered to make quick decisions with limited information to keep us in the game. What we call this is being highly aligned and loosely coupled. Now think about that for a second. Highly aligned is the structure of the big organization, the formal structure. Loosely coupled means you can adapt and change with the limited information you have at that time to keep you in the game. Corporate America will adopt this if they want to operate at pace out on the edge of what might be possible. Highly aligned, loosely coupled. You know, the great British Jaguar team probably taught me more lessons than any other team. I saw lessons learned. I sat in on all the sessions this morning, but I saw lessons learned earlier this morning. For me, we get lessons all the time. Some of them are welcomed, and some of them can be embarrassing. And at this level, the mechanics that you operate with are top class, world class, and they know it. And they love to poke fun at the drivers whenever they can. And the mechanics on these great teams extraordinary teams will tell anybody that'll listen that the most useless pieces of equipment that they bring on any given race weekend would be the drivers. And so they poke fun at us, and we poke fun right back at them. Unfortunately, sometimes they end up being right, and we have to eat crow, and it is embarrassing. But with your permission, I'll tell you a great story about this great Jaguar team. The second year that I was there, I was teamed with Davy Jones from Houston, Texas. We had the fastest car in the race. Davy Jones did the first stint, and it was 2 hours long. He was almost a minute in the lead. Now, the rule that I mentioned earlier on, at the Le Mans 24-hour race, the track is 7 miles long. If something breaks, the mechanics can only work on it in the pit lane. So if something breaks, the driver is expected to somehow jimmy-rig this thing to maybe get it back to the pit so the mechanics can fix it. And I'm a race car guy, and I've built lots of cars, so I felt fairly confident. And they give us a little toolkit. Well, we have the fastest car. Davey comes in, hands it over to me. We're a minute in the lead. I get strapped in. I drive down the pit lane. This thing is a beast down the long straight for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, I got a call on my radio, Derek, pit, next lap for another driver change. I was just about to pull into top gear. I'm at 237 miles an hour. I pull the gear lever back, and the gear lever breaks in my hand. The fastest car in the race, leading the race, the gear lever is now broken. Well, what was even worse, I pulled it out of the gear that I was in. I got no drive. I can't get it back to the pit lane. I pulled off to the side of the road. The track marshals run out, push me back behind a break in the guardrail. I jump out. I look at the gearbox. I can see exactly what happened. There's a gear selector fork that's connected to all the gears in the gearbox, and it's connected to a steel rod that was solid. Somebody had drilled up the middle of it to make it lightweight, but they didn't deburr the inside of it, which means they left a jagged edge. Jagged edge caused a vibration. Vibration caused a fracture, and after 4 hours, it broke. But there was still about 2 inches sticking out. And I thought, if they've given me a little vice grips wrench in this toolkit, I could grab onto this, yank it into any gear. It's a V12 Jag engine. I can drive it to the pits in any gear. They could fix it, and we get back in the game because there's 20 more hours left. So I open up the toolbox. There's the vice grips wrench. I go to the back of the car. See the word cut? That's the side of the bodywork. I lift off the side of the bodywork. I lean over the tire, and I get on the gearbox, and I can feel all the gears in there, but I can't get it into gear. Has anyone here ever tried to get a car or a motorcycle in gear when the engine is not running? You know how you have to rock it back and forth to get the gears to align to get in? Well, I couldn't do that when I was in at the side, so I moved around the back. See how low the rear wing is on the car? I moved around the back of the car, and I leaned over the rear wing. I got on the gearbox. The only way I could start making this thing rock back and forth, I started doing these pelvic thrusts. I'm giving it all I can. I'm looking like a crossbreed in a dog in heat and a porn star. I look up and the live television cameras had arrived. There I was, live all across France, all across Europe. My mechanics and my sponsors looking at the monitor thinking, what is he doing? What's broken? What's he using to fix it? So I bent over. I gave it one last thrust. It goes into gear. I was fit to be tied. I threw the tools in. I got into the car. Put my seatbelts on, put my foot in the clutch because it was in gear. I fired the engine up, released the clutch. The thing was in reverse. So when you talk about trying to do too much yourself without the team of people around you, think of that. I had to do it again, got into a forward gear, got it back to the pits. They fixed it. We ran 9 more hours before the engine blew up. However, the video is out on YouTube. Okay, so we're right on time here. Remember that first question I asked? Why? Why was the number so small of extraordinary teams of people who get to operate on the edges and then celebrate in the victory podium? So I've given you a bit of a feel for how they think and operate, right? Let me just go a level deeper. So about 8 years ago, I had my first book published. The reason I published this is because my son, who now races at the Indy 500, came to all the junior series in America. And I had moms and dads ask me, but how does my son or my daughter ever do that? Because you had all the connections and all the information and knew the skills that he or she would have to develop. So as a passion, I spent a couple of years writing this book. I was honored to have Mario Andretti write the foreword for my book. Let me just read you a couple of lines from the foreword. He said, Derek's book teaches lessons it took guys like me years to learn. Quite honestly, I believe the advice in this book resonates far beyond the racing community. Now, it wasn't meant to do that. But I realized the power of the high-performance principles of our sport could radiate way beyond our racing paddocks. But when he wrote that, I became fascinated by what else might he have written. So I pulled another quote from one of his books. Here it is here. Desire is the key to motivation, but it's the determination and commitment to an unrelenting pursuit of your goal, a commitment to excellence that will enable you to attain the success you seek. Mario Andretti. Now, do you see the words I've underlined? Do you think is that the vocabulary that runs through the fabric of these extraordinary teams? Of course it is. And there's no magic. It's there for everybody. I saw similar words to this earlier this morning. So I'm fascinated by athletes. I'm fascinated by the NFL, quarterbacks, the level they play, baseball, swimming, anything. I'm fascinated by people who are at the top of their game. And I'm forever scouring for quotes that I can get an insight into how they think. I pulled these two quotes from the same American athlete. He said, when I was younger, I was taught not to make excuses. Same athlete. He said, you don't accidentally show up in the World Series. Derek Jeter. Now, I don't know anything about baseball, but I know Derek Jeter. I've heard of him. Is he the model? Professional athlete? So when you read these quotes here from Derek Jeter, I was taught not to make excuses. You don't accidentally show up in the World Series. When you read those quotes, you think, is that the attitude in these extraordinary teams? Of course it is. You don't accidentally show up being able to kill the Terminator. You don't accidentally show up with a great P&L. You accidentally show up with customers who trust you implicitly, no matter what. So let's just, as we wrap our arms around this, let's just imagine for a minute that we're going to look at our team on the victory podium. There's the most famous victory podium in our sport, arguably the most famous victory podium in the world of motorsports. Let's just imagine that's your team there. Look, let's imagine that. Actually, hang on a second here. There we go. Yep. I'm not so sure how big the bill is for sponsorship like that. Is the finance department here? Okay, so let's just imagine that's our team of people. The team who's been on that podium 20 times. You've probably heard his name, Team Penske, Roger Penske. I'm sure you're familiar with him. Private company, multi-billion dollar, 77,000 employees. He happens to be a good friend of mine because I've done so much television with him. But Roger Penske has been on that podium 20 times. That will never happen in our lifetime again. This is history being written that will never be repeated. That's me interviewing Roger on the bottom left-hand side. I always go to him and he talks about the people, developing human capital. It's all about the people. Well, about 10 years after I retired from racing, I was still active doing track tests. I would track test championship-winning Formula One, IndyCar, stock cars, and I had access to pretty much every team. When Al Unser Jr. won the IndyCar championship in 1994 for Roger Penske, I called the team and said, could I track test Alan Sir Jr.'s car and write a story about it? The stories end up going to 17 countries in 12 different languages. But they allowed me to do it. Before I stepped in the car, they handed me a Penske coin. That's it in the middle. A Penske coin like that. And on the back side of the Penske coin, have a look at it here, is an expression Roger got from his dad. Effort equals results. They gave me this coin before I stepped in the car and said, Roger likes to put this coin into the first pay packet of every new employee because he wants this encoded into every new employee. Effort equals results. He has it on his desk. He has it in the race team in Mooresville. He has it on every race truck that goes down the street. Everybody understands what effort equals results mean. But you know, I looked into that and I realized mediocre effort equals mediocre results. A big effort will equal big results. And it's right there, there's no magic. I once asked Roger, I said, when you employ people, do you consciously put them in a position where they can be the best they can be? He said, not necessarily. He said, I like to put them in a position where they want to be the best they can be. Do you see the difference when you add that one word, want? See the top left-hand corner? That's some of his Indy 500 Borg Warner trophies. He now has 20. Do you know he didn't always have the fastest car at the Indy 500? And do you know that sometimes, whether it's conditions, ambient temperature, setup of the car, but when he recognizes that his car does not have enough speed to beat the competition, he will make a strategic move. Before the final pit stops, he'll call his frontline people together and he'll ask them to go beyond their best. And they never consider it pressure. They consider it a privilege that he has the confidence to ask them to go beyond their best. I bet you there's people in this room here in the years to come will be asked to go beyond their best. And it might be a pressure initially, but I want you to consider it a great adventure that someone has the confidence in you to go beyond your best. And if you are, you'll be part of that portfolio of leaders, despite a designation that will become obvious to everybody. And they're the people who finally kill that Terminator guy. I mentioned earlier Muhammad Ali. I want to throw up two words on the screen here. But Muhammad Ali just said, make good choices. Very simple. I was among 5 people in his home that day. It was only years afterwards that I realized that this might be the most powerful word in the English language. Because the greatest situation we're all in is that we can choose to do whatever we want. We can sit in these keynotes, we can sit at these conferences, we can hear all the nuggets that can go over the top of our head, or we can grab some of the nuggets that are invaluable high-performance principles, use them for ourselves, and potentially radiate them to the people within our sphere of influence. The greatest power we all possess is the ability to make that choice. And if you do, there's a lot of giftedness in this room. That's why you're here. But if you do take some of these nuggets and add to your giftedness, I promise you, you can only get better. And if that's true, a better you makes a better us as we go forward. That's page 60 of my latest book, which is Race Team Tactics for Business. This is full of high-performance principles. You read it in an hour someday. We've got some here for some people. We're going to be back there later on, so please come by if you want to grab a copy of this and have a chat or take a selfie or whatever. But a better you makes a better us. Let me throw the next word up. Complex. So when you decode sales excellence, it's more complex these days than it's ever been in the past. That's part of the challenge and part of the opportunity for us to be able to separate ourselves. But if you think about complex, we are all in exciting times because of the information and the opportunity that's being presented to us. A lot of it here at this conference. And we're going to march forward together. Do you know that we're trained never to focus on the rear view mirror? You're only allowed to glance in it. People think, oh, well, that's what's behind us. In our business, that's what we're accelerating away from at high speed. You know there's no passenger seats in our cars? We can't afford to carry unproductive weight that just sits there. You know there's no shortcuts allowed in our sport? You just can't shortcut your way to success in our sport. And I tell people, performance is personal, high performance is highly personal. And I saw on this screen earlier peak performers. But let me tell you a reality. The zone of peak performance is not a crowded place because there's a high price for entry. Because it takes commitment and dedication and sacrifice and trust and an element of risk to operate out on those edges. But there are people here today who are going to get up into that zone of peak performance. There is plenty of room. It only takes a choice to add to your giftedness to get you where you want to be. So let me just use our imagination. We're right on time here. Let's just imagine for a minute we're going to run a Blackhawk IndyCar team at this year's Indy 500. And we know all the skills. We know what's expected. Hands up those who would like to be on this team. Whoa. Oh, okay. We might have to run 2 cars. Okay. There's our car right there. Do you see it? Hang on. And now I know this is $1 million deal right there. So let's just imagine that. About 5 minutes before we strap our driver in, as we close out here, about 5 minutes before we strap our driver in, we're going to see scenes like this. There's a huddle of people. The team manager's giving them their last-minute instructions before they go against the competition. If we were to listen in, this might be what we'd hear. He's going to say, look, what we're about to try and do will not be easy. But as an aligned team of people, we've done extraordinary things together in the past. He's going to remind the driver, I want you to trust your frontline team of people when you come screaming down that pit lane for new wheels and tires and a full tank of gas. Then he's going to remind his driver, you have world-class preparation all through your team and all through your equipment, which will give you the confidence to stand on that gas pedal just a little bit harder and a little bit sooner. And he's going to say, look, I may have to ask people to go beyond their best, and I definitely might need the big effort. But then he'll explain to them, if we just connect the dots to these high-performance principles, by default, we will position ourselves to get on that victory podium to celebrate more often than our competition. And that's my hope for everybody here. And in the years to come, when I talk to John, or maybe Trent, and they tell me that you're bigger and better and stronger and more powerful and more extraordinary, more profitable than ever before, and when he tells me that, I'll take some credit. No, I'm just kidding. But remember that very first question as we close out here? The very first question was, where does extraordinary live? The answer is, within every one of us, as long as you remain obsessed with success, So when this conference is over and you scatter back across the country, every day, I want you to start your engines. I want you to burn rubber, and I want you to be extraordinary. I'm Derek Daly. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Blackhawk, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.